Good evening and welcome to episode 16 of the Vegan Hour on Tuesday, August the 20th. And I have Dr. Ali
Sammel.
Sammel. I just never pronounced your surname correctly.
It's all good.
We're going to have a very interesting episode tonight. But first, let's mention the wonderful sponsors of the Vegan Hour, which is Vegan Frothers. You can see on the sign in the background there. Vegan Frothers do cruelty-free clothing. When you buy cruelty-free clothing from Vegan Frothers, you are supporting animal sanctuaries. 100% of the profits go to them. So that's a really good reason to be getting your vegan clothing from Vegan Frothers. And also Indian natural food products, which I just had some of their lovely sausages today. Gluten-free, soy-free, non-GMO, all natural. Love it. So thank you, Indian, for supporting the Vegan Hour as well. Now, I see lots of people coming online, which is great. Let's just mention 3 things happening this week, and then we'll get on with tonight's show because we've got a lot to talk about tonight. So 3 events coming up tomorrow night. If you're on the Gold Coast, if you go to BKA Vegan Restaurant in Burleigh Heads, you can get bowls of the most amazing food for only $20 each. It's their bowling night from 5 p.m. It's usually packed, best to book. This Saturday, my Vegan Life group has Vegan Luck in the Park at Broadbeach from 12 noon. Bring some vegan food, meet some friends, and or make new friends, and you've got great like-minded people there. And also on Sunday, Brisbane Vegan Markets in Brisbane from 12 noon at West End. That's getting it all out of the road. And Troy says, such a stunning guest. I thought he was talking about me then. Such a stunning presenter. I'm sure he is, yes. Okay, so tonight, oh geez, we've got the comments coming through real quick already there. Kathleen says, got to get back on that bike. Yeah, after the food comment, yeah. And David, thank you for joining us. David, I'm glad you're here too, because we've got lots to talk about tonight. Now, in the promo video, I mentioned that we were going to be talking about the consciousness of water, and that is our introduction into a much larger area that we're going to be talking about tonight. Because as important as that is, we really want to get into the sort of things that are really hitting the planet pretty hard at the moment, that is coming up quite a lot and bringing up a lot of debate. And that, of course, is what's happening with our environment, what our future is looking like. And so this is why Ali is the perfect person to ask about this, because you have a lot of experience in this area. So please take it away. Tell us who you are, or wherever you want to start, basically. Okay. I want to find out a little bit about you, a little bit about your vegan journey, okay, and then we can get into the hard facts.
Okay. Well, hi everybody. This is wonderful. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
I really appreciate this. So my name is Ali. I have my undergraduate degree is in science. So I did genetic engineering and biochemistry many moons ago. I then I wanted to travel. I've always loved traveling. And, and so I thought, I can't really travel around the world saying, hey, I'm a genetic engineer, employ me. So I did my teaching degree, and so I became a math science teacher. And I went to Canada, and I lived over there for 20 years. I grew up on the Gold Coast, and then I went to Canada. And interestingly, I actually really love teaching. And I love the communication of science and getting students really motivated into science. And then I did my master's in ecological sustainability. And so sort of all around that, the whole notion of what we're doing with the planet and how we can change it, and specifically in relation to education. Okay. And then I went and I worked at started working at universities, teaching science, teaching people to be science teachers. Yeah. And then and especially environmental science. And then I did a PhD looking at the teaching and learning of science and ecological sustainability, deep ecology, all those type of things. And so for the past 20 years, I finished that 20 years ago. And since 1992, I've been teaching at universities in Canada and Australia. And I specifically look at Western science, the teaching and learning of Western science and the communication of science, but very much so from deep ecology or ecological sustainability, social justice lens. And so no matter what I teach, especially now, no matter what I teach, there's an underlying agenda of sustainability.
Yes.
and compassion and interconnection of all life or everything on the planet.
Yes.
And so whether I'm teaching physics, which I will be tomorrow morning, to 300 students, or whether it's chemistry or whether it's earth-based science or biological science, there is that sort of that underpinning through the lens of what does this mean for the planet? How do we make sense of ourselves in relationship with the rest of the planet and what it means for the future of the planet?
I love that that's your approach, because I had the opposite experience from my chemistry teacher in high school, who was very disconnected. I'll put it that way, and it really set me off and no, that's not the way to understand life and the planet and that, So I love your approach there.
And my vegan journey.
And your vegan journey,
okay,
yes. So before we get into the hard-hitting facts, I don't know Ali's vegan journey, so I've said don't tell me it. Just I want to hear it for the first time, so because apparently it's pretty good.
Well, it's interesting. So for those people, if you're vegan out there, I'm sorry, I'm going to sort of say a non-vegan thing for a second, so hopefully it won't offend. But I remember it was, when was it? It was 1991. I was in Montreal and I had the most exquisite steak. Like it was like one of those steaks that take over the whole plate. It was at this basically meat eating
This is
restaurant.
the point at which I need to put...
Sorry, disclaimer. Sorry, disclaimer. So I had the most amazing steak. It was delicious. I remember the next day I went back to where I was living in Stratford in Ontario, and I was going to school. I was a high school teacher, the science teacher, and as I was walking through the snow, I came to a red light, and of course I didn't know anybody vegetarian. It wasn't in my...
Yes,
it
hadn't
in my
occurred
thought.
to you?
No, not really.
Okay, yeah.
And so, but I always really appreciated sort of animals, I love them. I just didn't put the connection between me eating them and my love of them. Yeah. Anyway, I was standing at a street light on a corner, and it was snowing, and all of a sudden a pig truck came by. And so this Stratford is the pork capital of Ontario.
Right.
And so there are always pig trucks. And so this pig truck stopped, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden this snout came through the grate.
Oh, wow.
And I just looked at it, and I'm like, oh, hello, piggy. And then I looked at this pig, and its whole side was open. It was just a complete mess. It was just bleeding everywhere. And for about 3 minutes, it was the longest night of my life.
Yeah.
I remember just looking at this pig's eyes, and it was almost, there was liquid in its eyes, and I'm just staring at it, and then we just had this connection, and I just started bawling.
Yeah.
And then I remember...
I'm really bawling now listening to it. Wow.
I remember turning to the driver that had his window open. I remember looking at the driver, and it's almost like I wanted to scream at him. I was so angry. I felt hurt for this pig, and I remember looking at the driver, and I'm thinking, I wanted to sort of scream at him. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, it's not the driver's fault. It's me, because I choose to eat meat. As long as I continue to make the choice to be a consumer of meat, then animals like that will go through it. And I looked at that pig who was literally dying on the way to go into the thing, and I made a promise to him then and there that I will never eat meat again. And I haven't. That was my pig story.
Wow, that's powerful.
There you go.
That's profound, that is powerful, and that is an instant just realisation connection.
Yeah,
wow, that is incredible.
So there you go.
Thank you for sharing that. And that was 1992 you went vegan?
The start of January 1992.
Wow.
And I haven't eaten meat since
27 years. That's fantastic. Wow. So see, there are compassionate scientists in the world. Marina says a pig truck did it for you, an emu farm did it for me in 1993.
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah.
It is that connection, when you see yourself in the other, and when you recognise self, it's that kinship. It's that whole idea of the Indigenous community looking at all of my relations. When you see yourself in other, and you actually there's that connection there.
And this is something that you also lecture about and know quite about, the Indigenous connections.
Yeah, for the past 20 years I've looked at how Western science and Indigenous ways of knowing coincide. And so I've written a few books about that, and my next book is actually, which should be finished in the next 3 weeks, is looking at that.
And I believe we're going to try and put some links to some of your publications and stuff like that. Later you're going to send me information on that. There was a quote that came to mind, a Buddhist quote, when you were talking about, when you see yourself in the other, it's something along the lines of all beings tremble before death,
Absolutely.
And when we see ourselves, in the eyes of another, what harm can we do?
Yeah.
How can we hurt another?
That's right.
And that's really a basis of compassion, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was a profound experience that you had. That is, wow.
And it is, and I guess coming back to my philosophy on teaching and learning, especially in science, compassion is the key word that keeps on coming back to it. And linking to water, so if I segue into the water.
Yes, which we're going to do in a second. We're going to segue into the water because we promised a show about water, but we decided that we would expand way. I mean, you could do a show just about water, but we decided there are more pressing matters that need to be talked about tonight, so as well.
Absolutely.
So,
So if we do start off with water and we look at the seminal work of Emoto, so he was a Japanese man who did some research around water and how water responds to different things, whether it's sort of pollution, whether it's anger, whether any type of emotion.
That's true.
And it's interesting because now his work, at that point in time, his work wasn't supposed to be done under controlled scientific processes.
Right.
And so he did this wonderful work, and it was critiqued because it wasn't done under sort of scientifically controlled processes. But then at that point, and even now, there are limits to what the scientific method can do or should do. And so I don't even know if it actually could still be done that way, doing that type of research. Not all type of research. Again, science only answers certain questions. There are certain questions science can't answer. And so it does a fantastic job at answering the questions it can. So if you're looking at Emoto's work, I don't know if science can actually answer some of the things that he set out for. So even if his work is critiqued based on its flaws around the scientific method, what it does raise are beautiful questions around what is life? How do we define life?
Right.
And if we don't, and what is worthy of compassion? What is not worthy of compassion? And that social construction of what we give compassion to and what isn't, what we deem as not being thought of in a compassionate way.
What should we respect and not respect?
Absolutely.
And should there be that question at all?
That's right. And I think this sort of, so not touching base on his work, because that isn't my area, but one of my research areas is looking at the social construction of water. And what I mean by that is that, we're all born into communities and ways of thinking that will teach us how to actually engage and react in the world. And so, I didn't come out of my mother's womb with this understanding of what water is. I had to be taught about what water is and things like that. And most of it's very subliminal.
Yes.
Right? True. It's something that we rely on. We all know we rely on it. But, we see it as a commodity. We see it as something that's non-living. And we very much sort of look at it that way. And so a lot of my research, especially in the past 6 years, has looked at the social construction of water, how we socially make sense of it.
Right.
And so one of the things that my work, and I work with researchers in Canada around this as well, but I publish in this area. And one of the things that my research looks at is basically there's different ways of making sense of the bigger meta-narrative or the bigger picture around water.
Okay.
And there is what we call the hydrological cycle and the hydrosocial cycle.
Okay. Boy, you've lost me there.
No,
I'm a simple man.
So the hydrological cycle, so if we're looking at how we teach people to make sense of water, the hydrological cycle is what most of us grew up with. It's understanding water through the lens of science. So we talk about how the water cycle, how it moves around the earth, it moves around the sort of the planet, how it sort of, it evaporates, it turns into clouds, it comes back down, and then it sort of falls on the waterways and things like that. And so we do it from a very much a perspective of science, and if you look at any photo, and I challenge you, go into the internet and put in the water cycle, you will see photos that actually are devoid of humanity. So we talk about it in relationship with the natural environment, but not necessarily with cities, tauns, people, policies, human agendas, things like that. And so it's very much the hydrological cycle is taught very much from a perspective that it's nature. It's a natural phenomenon, and because it's nature, nature-based, there's not much that we can do to it. So again, if I specialise in droughts and floods, which is what climate change is actually, the big thing about climate change,
yes.
and how we actually make sense of droughts and floods. And we see them again, and we construct them as a natural phenomenon that we don't have any control over. You know, the gods are cursing us, and there's no rain, and all there's flooding. And so we see it as a natural phenomenon. And that's how we tell the story. Therefore, we don't need to take responsibility for all the ways in which humanity has actually changed the environment that causes that.
Of course.
And so, it's very much. And if you actually, a paper that was actually just published last Friday, that in one of the Australian journals that I wrote, looks at. I did a study of looking at. A lot of papers across Australia and Canada from just about every single discipline that there is. So from the arts, from economics, from science, from education, from all these different things. And I looked at the story of how it constructs water. And very much it tells that whole idea. It's sort of, water is to be understood as a natural thing. The best thing that we can actually do is try to manage it, mitigate against any problems, and put infrastructures in place to actually protect ourselves from droughts or floods. And it's seen as negative. And so there is another way, though, of actually talking about water, and one of those other ways is the hydrosocial cycle. And so when we teach about water from a hydrosocial cycle, we're talking about water's inherent relationship with humanity. And that most cultures throughout the world, or cities throughout the world, have been built around freshwater sources. They're built on rivers, on things like that, because again, you can only survive less than 5 days without water. And so again, water is a very important thing, and we've changed water courses. We've changed waterways, we've changed things like that. So again, there's this lovely reciprocal relationship between humans and water, and so water changes us, and we actually change water. And that sort of thing. And so the hydrosocial cycle teaches that humans play a huge role in what's actually happening with water, whether it's polluted, whether it's not. All those type of things. And so again, looking at water from the hydrological cycle, it's not saying that that's a wrong thing of doing it on the science side, but putting it, that framing in relationship to humanity and to social policies, to different economic agendas, things like that actually play a role in shaping water from a human's perspective.
What I'm hearing you say there, one of the things that I'm hearing you say there is that whether or not we acknowledge water as a living being or not, that we need to work with it respectfully. Yes,
that's right. And so the hydrosocial cycle, doesn't it take it that far? It really just sort of looks at the fact that humanity has a role in influencing water, even if it's just from a managerial thing. The paper that I'm writing right now with a colleague from Florida. His name's Peter Blaise Cochran. He's a very well-respected environmental educator in the US. He's retired now, and we're taking it that step further. We're looking at the relationality of water. That's what we're calling it.
Okay, the relationality.
In fact, Peter, if you're listening, you're probably going to be thinking, you're giving it away what we're calling it. It's our term.
It's all right, he's not listening. I can't see him on the list.
And it's that whole idea of understanding water, not just from a social thing, but understanding it from very much an intrinsic human, that compassionate, that whole thing that when I looked at that pig's eyes, or when that lady looked at the emu and had that response to understand water at that level. Because only if we understand it at that level can we actually see how it's part of us. And a good example of that is if we actually choose a cake, one of my favourite foods. So if you choose a cake, and if a cake, the majority of the cake was made up of carrots, the mass of it was made up of carrots, what would we call that cake?
I'd call that delicious.
Yeah, absolutely.
A carrot cake.
A carrot cake, right? And if you look at most things, if you look at what the main ingredient is, it determines the identity of that thing.
Yes.
And yet, if you look at the majority of what humans are made up of.
Yes. I was thinking this as Absolutely.
We don't, and we're taught that water is a non-living thing. It's a non-living thing that is a commodity. It's a resource for us to exploit.
That's right.
It is that type of thing. But if we actually look at it from how it actually is us, you know, you are water. The most part of you is water. And so if you actually look at the water and see it as a connection to yourself, it's a profound thing. Your body will not exist. Most of the chemical reactions in your body could not happen with water. In fact, you breathing, you using energy. Right now, all of our bodies are going through cellular respiration. We take in oxygen and we give out carbon dioxide, but we also produce water. In eating food and using energy, your body produces its own water. It combines different chemicals to produce water. And so water we pee out. It doesn't just come from the water we drink or the liquids we drink. It actually comes through chemical reactions of the food that release the energy and provide us with water. So water is your body makes water, right? You are so much part of water, yet we don't see that. Whereas if we were taught to understand that, and if we were taught to see how we're deeply interconnected with this, and that same process of cellular respiration happens in every living thing. It happens in plants, and it happens 24/7 in plants. It happens 24/7 in animals. And so that connection of water, and water flows in and out of us. Every single drop of water we have had has been in the clouds, it's been in another living thing, it's been in a plant. It is just in your body for a certain amount of time. And we share it, so it flows through all of us. And so, you know, that whole understanding of that interconnection between water, if you really get that,
profound, isn't it?
You do, and you start to understand how all life shares this wonderful thing.
Well, as John said, water is the lifeblood of civilization.
Absolutely. And it's a civilization, and again, that's a hydrosocial perspective, which is great. It is that, but it's also the lifeblood of every living thing that we share. And again, you know, we had this discussion earlier, what is living? And so I'm also very aware of that, because science has done this separation between, which is not correct actually. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's correct in the eyes of science, but in other cultures, it doesn't align with other cultural philosophies. So if you're looking at the definitions of what is living and what is non-living, and what was living. So when I teach science, I say that there's living, non-living, and was living. There is a distinction between those two. So something that's non-living is, say, in science, is like a rock, whereas something like a dead plant is was living. So there is a distinction between those things. But if you look at the definition of living and non-living from another more interrelated connection thing, you know, if you look at rocks or soils or things like that, you know, there is an intrinsic sort of elemental, you know, vibration to them that we share, whether it is those molecule compounds of water in them.
Well, there's definitely an energy, whether they're living or not. There's still an energetic component to all forms. Everything.
And you know, people say to me, but that's not really a science thought. It's like, absolutely it is. That's chaos theory. I mean, you look at all the latest science and chaos theory, and it shows that every single thing is energy and matter interconnect. And again, Einstein, with his famous quote, E = mc squared. I mean, what he showed, and that was actually really profound. It said that the whole universe, if you look at the Big Bang, the whole universe, it started from energy. It was energy that actually turned into matter. So matter came from, right at the very beginning, it came from energy. You know, it had, so energy goes to matter and matter goes to energy. I mean, that's really profound.
I think, John said, I'll never pee the same again. and Kathleen replied, I hope not upside down, John. I don't even know what that's. There was a comment from Marina saying, I'm going to get a glass of water earlier, but I left that. Crystals feel alive, Troy says. See, there's a few different things that's occurred to me as you've been saying this. One is that I love your passion about this. It just comes across, so it's beautiful. I love that you acknowledge the limitations of science at the start of this particular discussion in understanding certain aspects and that when it came to water and that as well. Can Harry remember all the things that he wanted to say? The other thing is we're talking about energy, vibration, all the rest, is that we are basically space. in that on a cellular level, it's predominantly space, 80, 90, 95, 99, whatever the percentage is. Do you know what the percentage is?
I taught this last week actually to my students, 2 weeks ago, they're on break. That one of the things is if we actually look at an atom, right, and you take an atom and you blow it up to a very large thing, if you actually were to look at the outer shell of the electrons, so you've got the nucleus with which the protons and the neutrons in there, and then you've got the electrons that are in an orbit in different shells outside. So if you actually look at the electron orbits, the size of a football field, or even football field, I guess, if you're looking at that, and you actually explore how big that nucleus would be, it would be less than the size of a pinhead. So again, we're talking about an actual atom, the size of a pinhead compared to a pinhead sitting in the middle of a football field. That's actually the relationship that atoms have. So again, when it blows our mind, and it's very hard to speak of things like that because. But there is more space, as you said, than there is matter.
It's fun. I didn't realise there was that much space. And I've met some people that have got a lot of that up there, but sorry.
And for my students who are watching, that's on the quiz this week. That's a question on the quiz. So there you go.
I wonder if there are any of your students watching. It'd be good to know. Put a comment up if you are watching. Okay, so. That's fascinating, and I can definitely resonate with what you're saying there. I think it's really interesting. What we need to sort of look at now is move from that into the direction of another theme that we're going to talk about tonight, which is what's happening environmentally, and what science is saying about what is happening environmentally and what the future prospects possibly might be, because you did mention to me, I think last night, I think I was talking to you on the phone, and you did mention to me about David Suzuki. You're friends with him, and can we talk about that?
Sure.
Just to set where humanity might be heading, and then we'll expand from there. So what was it that David found out when he interviewed, did he interview 100 scientists?
Yeah, so what he did was, so about 2 years ago, I was at a conference in Canada, and one of the things that David was talking about there, that sounds very pretentious, David Suzuki, but I don't mean to say David, but one of the things that David was talking about there was, he was saying that he asked 100 of the world's leading climate change scientists, and the question that he actually asked is something that we're not actually talking about in general conversations, around the world. And one of the things that he asked was, he asked them to give him a percentage of whether humanity will survive to the end of this century. And that's actually quite radical. So we're not actually talking about the planet, we're actually talking about humans' existence.
Yes, humans,
whether as a species we can survive, because we're looking at the extinction rate of so many different species that we don't actually speak about humans as a species, as if we're above the whole nature thing, and but looking at us as a species, and what is the likelihood of us surviving to the end of the century, which is really only 80 years, it's a generation.
That's right.
And they all came back, this is independent, they all came back and said it was 50%.
50% chance.
And that gives me shivers. I think the whole room was at that conference just
went quiet.
Because again, I think that part of it is that we really don't realise how profound this change is. And again, we have been talking about, it was really in the 60s that they started noticing that it's the it's the ideology of society right now. It's our beliefs, our practices, our thoughts, the way we think. We've had them for so long now, especially since the Industrial Revolution, that it wasn't until the 60s that people like Rachel Carson started saying, look, something's going on here. And since then, that, it has been a progression of people sort of calling us on it. And again, for my lifetime, because I was born in the 60s, it's one of those things that for me, that's all I know. And so again, you know, a lot of people who are sort of 50, like me, 50 plus, will turn around and say things like, well, everybody's been saying this for decades now, you know. But again, we've got to remember that this is actually, it's only been maybe 4 decades that we've actually been having this conversation.
It's true.
And it takes a long time to turn this massive ship around. And of course, we know it's going to take longer than this.
Yes.
And so I think that it's one of those things that I think people are starting to realise the profoundness. And of course, it's escalating. In the natural environment, it's exponentially happening, whereas we're only sort of asking these questions. But most of us can actually sit back and relax and continue our lives. We can watch our TV, we can go to the store, we can buy our things. There's still choices to us. But to the natural world, it's moving forward at such a fast rate that we're actually not bearing witness to it.
Yes, but it is sneaking up on us so rapidly, and the awareness of that is now coming across in mainstream media a lot more now. There is, and I want to sort of touch on the science behind it. I want you to explain the science behind it. What science is saying is happening. But it's interesting when, you know, we've had, say, 4 decades of warnings that have gotten louder and louder, and now they've really gotten loud in the last, especially I think in the last year. But what I found interesting and extremely disappointing behaviour is one of the, I think it was Exxon, one of the major oil companies, having a committee or whatever it was called of people within its company that was examining environmental changes in the 70s and the 80s. And we're aware at that point, back then, of what was going on. Did they do anything about it? No, they did the opposite of warning people, and they did the opposite of, I mean, them being partly responsible for it. Instead of doing something about it, no, they started a disinformation campaign. This is well documented. You know, it's well documented now, but it was actually suppressed. That sort of information was suppressed for a couple of decades before it came out in mainstream media. So they started a disinformation campaign and poured millions of dollars into discrediting that there was any change happening. And they had influential people that were being paid to sort of say, oh, no, everything's all right. You know, it's like, and, you know, we find out the extent of it now, and we're just like, oh, seriously, you know, it makes no sense when we're shitting in our own nest, does it, you know? So,
and look, and I think it, you know, if you look at human behaviour, so one of the things that I look at there is just human behaviour. I think since the beginning of time, you know, people have a certain pathology or certain reaction to things. And so, I mean, back in the day, you know, all those years ago when they said the world was square, right, and you'd fall off the edge. You know, flat, sorry, you know, it was flat and you'd fall, you know, it was square side and it was flat and you'd fall off the edge. You know, it took a long time for people and science to actually show that the earth was round. Right, and again, you know, there are people who are still saying it's flat, and that's okay. There's the flat Earth movement.
There is quite a groundswell of that. When I need a good laugh, I watch some of their videos. But
and not, you know, the thing is, we're all entitled to have our own opinions, but then there's a difference between an opinion and educated, you know, the scientific understanding, or not even just science, but you know, an informed opinion. There's a difference between a formed opinion, a formed perspective, and an opinion.
That's true,
and that's the thing that I think that we're not doing well with right now. And again, I have no problem with people having their opinions. But again, the only thing, I'm not going to discredit anybody's opinion, but what I can do is I can talk about the science, or I can talk about evidence-based research that actually speaks to it, and then again, just leave them to actually explore it. But again,
just before we get into that, I want to address a comment there. Marina says, I cannot believe how many people I speak to that do not believe in climate change. They are living with their heads in the sand, very sad, and yes, we acknowledge that.
And I think part of it, again, is
this pathology of change.
And so one of the things that I looked at is, again, if we're looking at major changes that affect people and affect society, climate change is one of them, but there are many other things. Veganism is another one.
Being vegans,
or even including Indigenous perspectives. Right, you name whatever it is that's inclusive behaviour. You name any of those things. When there is a groundswell to get people to actually critique something that they're born with a certain ideology of what a society is and what a good person does, and with their,
certain
all those
conditioning.
That's right. And that's been promoted through everything that they've ever known, and all of a sudden somebody comes along and challenges that. The first thing, that there are many ways in why people resist climate change, and one of the ways is there is an anger element. Yeah. Right, and they take it as a personal, not necessarily personal attack, but again, what happens is that whole idea of when people are asked to change their way of thinking, they will always resist it, right? They will always resist it, and again, and that's human nature. It's not as if it's wrong, but it takes a while for people to actually start to the first time I ever hear anything, it's like, that sounds crap, right? The second time, it's like, that still sounds crap. The third time, it's probably that. Just about, I've heard that before. Yeah. The fourth time, well, tell me more about that. Yeah. And the fifth time, it's like, oh no, I've heard about that. Let me look into it. And, it's not. It's not for a while.
So to open up to something takes a while.
That's right.
Yes.
And so again, people do that. So with climate change, I think it's one of those things that people. It's easy. It's easy to feel threatened. And one of the things I say is that, we have to resist our privilege. Climate change makes us turn around and say, I have this lifestyle. I've worked hard for it. I've done all these things. What do you mean? I believe that I need to give something up. If I really take on any of this change, whether it's climate change, infusing Indigenous beliefs or veganism, it's that whole idea of I'm going to have to give something up. And I'm entitled to this lifestyle. I've worked hard for it. And so what happens is you put in there is a fear-based thing that manifests as anger. It manifests as all these different things. And so what happens is people usually resist it. And that's the thing. There are multiple facets to resisting. I won't go through them now. They are in many papers, including my own, looking at how people actually respond to climate change. And that's okay. The thing is, though, at some point, they will move or may not move past the different stages that you need to. But the reality of climate change, if you're looking at science, if you're looking at it, the reality is there are too many papers. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of papers that actually, and with evidence-based papers in peer-reviewed journals, and I can tell you, it takes at least 2 or 3 years for your work to actually even go through the peer review process. It is a hard thing. So it takes a long time for it to be proofed. And only if it's shown to be evidence-based and valid will it can actually be published, right? And as somebody who goes through this process, I can tell you about that. So there is too much, there is overwhelming evidence. So climate change is a thing, right? Now, and people usually say to me, but it has been a thing. And in fact, it has been. There have been 7 major climate change events that we know of in the planet's history, right? So this isn't new. What is new is the speed at which it's happened. All the other ones have taken hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. And so over that time, all life, whether it's a plant or whether it's an animal, has had time to evolve and change, and it responds and adapts to its environment, right? It takes a long time for a mutation to occur that allows that species to sort of get ahead and things like that. So the thing is, though, it really has been, in the past 200 years, we have seen a change. That is not enough. I mean, if you're a fruit fly and you've got a very high, you breed every 14 days, you can probably find the mutations and you can probably evolve. But for humans and plants and some trees, they don't actually start their reproductive cycle for 60 years. So for the long-lived creatures, and those who are being affected by the devastation of the planet, directly, whether we're clear cutting their habitat, things like that, that's where the problem is. The problem comes in the time frame. The problem comes in the fact that it's human. It's called the Anthropocene. And the Anthropocene is how humans have changed the very chemistry of the air. They've changed. It's the first time the very chemistry of the air has been changed because of humans. Right? The water, the soil, every single part of this of the change in this Anthropocene is happened because of human intervention, and it's the rate. And so the biggest thing is that that will humans survive it? Will other species survive it? That's actually the question. The planet herself will survive it. I mean, we have no issue with the planet herself. I mean, the biggest environmental disaster that ever happened to this planet were these tiny new green bacteria in the ocean. The ocean was actually full of purple bacteria. So if you actually looked at the world millions and millions of years ago, it was green, it was purple.
It was purple.
It was lovely purple. It would have been lovely to see. But then this green bacteria came in, and this green bacteria started producing a gas that was not in the atmosphere at all. There was no oxygen in the atmosphere at all back then. For millions of years, there was no oxygen. And so all the life that was there, these bacteria could only they reacted in a non-oxygen atmosphere. And then this bloody little green bacteria started farting out this gas. And over millions of years, it changed the whole nature of the atmosphere. And that's when life on the planet as we know it now came into oxygen-based life that breathe in oxygen. That's when we evolved, right? But again, it took millions and billions of years for that to happen. And so now we're actually changing that ratio. I mean, there's always been slight changes, but we're changing that ratio to such a degree that we're threatening that. And so again, the planet will survive it, right? You know, life might be wiped out, or some life will change and evolve, but again, it won't be the way we know it.
Yes,
and that's what science is saying. It's saying that we have to be careful as a species. The reason why climate change is even on the radar is because humans are actually really undermining the way that we're going to live, and if we can live on this planet, and the way life is. Can we breathe in the oxygen? Can we actually, in the way that our bodies are now, can we actually drink the water? Can we actually eat the food that's left? There are so many different pollutants and things like that, that we're at that point where it's the first time in humanity we're really having some of these, because it's global scale, we're having these type of questions. And so that's really why it comes into it. I mean, if we weren't so human-centric, if we were looking more at the planet, we'd say, well, this is just one of the changes. But because we're aware of the implications to humans, all of a sudden we're saying, holy crap, this climate change we need to worry about, because it is affecting us.
Because that's right.
Whereas the other times we weren't around, climate change didn't.
I hate to say it, but that to me occurs as like a selfish thing, isn't it? It's like, oh, it's affecting us. We'll take notice now. You know, which unfortunately seems to be one of the problems of the human condition. Are we responsible for it?
Oh, the Anthropocene, absolutely. This climate change,
because from the Industrial Revolution onwards, and that
absolutely, and again, it's our ideology. And what I mean by that, it's the way the commodification, the way that we use the planet. It's the way of thinking and way of acting that we've normalised. It's saying that all cultures have felt this way and all cultures have done that. Actually, that's not the case.
No.
It's not the case.
There have been respectful cultures.
Absolutely, well, sustainable cultures. And again, if you look at, say, the Australian Indigenous people, even you look at the Kumameri from the Gold Coast, which is where I'm on, and so this is Yugambeh land, just to acknowledge it's Yugambeh land, and it's the Kumameri people who live on the Gold Coast. They've been living this lifestyle for thousands and thousands of years. And, you know, there was a way of relating to the earth, and part of that was keeping the population down. It was the carrying capacity of the land, right? And again, there was that part of it is because humans are breeding at such a high rate, it means that other species aren't given the chance to breed. They're not given the chance to have young, because we believe that we're the superior species. The earth is actually for us to use at our pleasure, and and how we choose to. And so therefore it means that because we have that assumption, because we have that ideology, it means that that's the foundational thing that's actually causing the Anthropocene or the climate change era, and this era. And that's actually where the problem is. We need to shift to understanding our relationship with the earth more holistically and more related. And that's what a new era of science looks at. It's called post-humanistic science, and that's where I come from. So there is an area, when we talk about science, it's not uniform. There are areas of science where there's a lot of work in that's talking about how we can live more respectfully. Right? And so it's the old way of science. When we say science, it's almost as if it's bad. It's like, oh, science. But
I've been known to say that.
But again, there are good and bad of everything, right?
Oh, yes.
And there are
Yeah.
sort of,
Yeah,
there
of
are
course.
ways in science that actually really promote, that are very much aligned with Indigenous ways of knowing and perspectives and ideologies with veganism. And even though they don't use those terms, because as we were saying, we talk about plant-based diet, we don't talk about veganism because of the term, the labeling and the advertising with it, But the thing is, though, if you actually look at this new form of science, and I guess that's what you asked, where do we go with this?
Yeah.
And I think part of it is for each of us to actually really stop and be reflective and say, let's have a look at some of our underlying beliefs and assumptions and the ways that we understand ourselves. And a lot of it is, it comes down to that whole notion of individually, we're probably not the most compassionate and caring to ourselves, right? We're not the nicest to ourselves.
That's a really good point, actually.
And, we don't show, what does it look like to show compassion to ourselves? Because we actually haven't. If we're looking at how can we be in a harmonious relationship with self? And if we don't know how to do that, then how can you actually be in a harmonious relationship with others, whether they're the cow, the emu, your friends, or other people?
That lack of harmonious self connection, where do you think that actually comes from?
Again, it's the way our society has raised us as people. It's that ideology of,
looking for things outside ourselves to satisfy us, or
that
whatever.
whole notion of just the way we make. In fact, it's the cornerstone of everything. How we understand our world. It's survival of the fittest. The story of science. You compete. It's that whole idea of you go somewhere. The other day I went somewhere to buy an apple, and there were about 3 apples left, and one of them was mangy looking, with sort of, and everybody was sort of choosing the nicest looking apples until everybody sort of left that one lonely apple, and I went and I grabbed the dodgy looking apple, and everybody looked at me as if to say, it's like, no, I will take the best piece of fruit for myself, and I will leave it's like the dodgy piece of fruit is fine. But
that's
it comes
actually
down to,
a really good analogy of how we got in this shit.
Yeah.
It's a really good analogy.
Exactly it.
Everybody's choosing the best apple and leaving the crap for others.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, you can't keep doing that. There's a finite resources in
Absolutely.
that.
And there's a million things about, the way that we construct. You speak to any farmer about what they can sell to Coles and Woolies, and it's got to look a certain way, but that's not really what an apple. Anyway,
I wanted to ask you, there's some comments here I want to get to, but I wanted to ask you, just talking about the original Indigenous owners of the land of Australia. I believe, and I'll just keep this really brief, I believe that our history, that from what we've been taught in school, that James Cook, Captain Cook came and what he saw was not what we were taught in school. In other words, the way they were described as primarily hunters that were moving around nomadically and apparently the original reports show that they actually had cultivated land or crops or whatever, and that they lived more in certain areas, didn't move that much, and had a different sort of lifestyle to what we were taught in school. Is that correct?
Well, I think one of the key things is that, every Indigenous community has their own sort of own way of thinking, being and interacting with their environment based on the environment. So it's really hard to sort of essentialise or say that they all did anything.
Okay.
But so some of them might have been hunters and gatherers. Some of them, they some of them were nomadic, some of them weren't. So every area and every sort of language base, every single group of people have their own sort of identity. So it's hard to generalise. However, one of the things that is coming out now is that whole idea when Cook landed, the first thing, this is actually coming back to water, segue, nice. When the very first thing, when the white fella came onto the land, what the Indigenous people did is they greeted them and they handed them water.
Oh!
Right? Because again...
Nice connection.
Again, that whole idea, they would have realised these people have been on a boat for a long period of time. They're landing there, and you offer the most precious thing that you have. And fresh water is the thing that links us all. And so they actually, with gratitude, welcomed them to the land with fresh water. Right? And again, of course, it wasn't seen that way, but it was actually done as you and I are connected, and we're connected through this thing of water. It's that whole thing, we are all related, and here is some fresh water for you. The way that Captain Cook saw the land and claimed the land, he claimed it as terra nullius. Terra nullius meant that no human lived here. So they did not actually see the Indigenous people of Australia as even being human.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's very profound. And the fact that, Indigenous cultures, I mean, the Indigenous people that I work with, all I can say is that I'm always humbled by their patience, their sense of, I think for me, if I had been treated 200 years that way,
you wouldn't have been so tolerant.
No, and I guess it's the patience, it's all those type of things. And again, I'm generalising, but what I'm saying, the people that I work with, it's that from little things, big things grow. It's that whole idea of we will be patient.
I've come across that before.
And that type of thing. But again, we have to really realise that, when this land was conquered, it was conquered legally because no people lived here. And so England could claim it as their own because there was nobody living here, because they actually saw them as flora and fauna. They weren't actually seen as, and again, and it comes back to, that's the original thing of where we're going with climate change, because again, we validate some things as important, other things as not. And so flora and fauna were seen as less than. And so we could then, if something is less than, then you can actually devalue it, you can dehumanize it, and you can then commodify it and use it for your own will, right? And again, it's that whole idea of them and us. And that's the problem in society, whether the them, if they're us, then we hold them dear, we say that they're respected. If it's other, whether it's another ethnicity, whether it's another species, we say, they're not as important. So we do the them and us, and so we can belittle them. And that's part of the whole ideology of what got us into this mess. Right?
Yes.
We need to actually break down those walls and actually see the interconnections that we all share, that we are all related. We are, whether you are a fly, a mosquito, which I still have problems with mosquitoes, but still, whether you're a fly or a mosquito, you still have a worth. Right. You still have, whether you're my best friend or my dog, you still have a worth.
Yes.
Whether you're whatever it is, you play a role on this planet, and so you should not be belittled. And until we actually find that connection, that sort of that linking, then we're going to still commodify things, capitalize, follow the capitalist system, and nothing will really change.
And I think Kathleen said it, talking about the capitalist system, she said this misrepresentation of information has been happening in all areas for many years, all controlled by the mighty dollar, which I agree with, and I like to add to that when money becomes God, ethics disappear, which is what we have seen happen due to just ridiculous selfishness. It's like, I don't care what's happening to you, I just care what I'm getting.
That's right.
And that's what's ruining everything for everyone. John says, where I find a hypocrisy is we the people are told that water is precious, save water, have short showers, but then industry is fracking, polluting water, using it voluminously, and the industry consumption and pollution goes unchecked. It's one rule for us the people and another for industry. Exactly. This can be applied to the whole biosphere. Industry continues to go unchecked. It's almost impossible for the people to be able to help the planet when industry continues the same old way. And I'll just add to that, that's spot on. It's even harder to help the planet when that industry is being supported by the governments that are meant to be working for the people, not the industries that are ruining the planet. So, and this is the problem we've got in the major powers of the world, Australia included, and of course the US, where it's just all like the government's in there just supporting the industry. It's
really even more insidious than that too, and I completely agree with what you're saying. But if you look at who makes the educational agendas and the curriculum, it's the government.
Yes.
And again, this is a whole big loop, and again, it's called the ideological state apparatus. Foucault sort of talks about this, and it's basically how the powers that be determine everything we know. Right, again, I grew up on the Gold Coast, I grew up in Australia, and so everything that I've ever understood about myself in the world has come from the formal and informal cultural education that I've received.
Right.
And that is all sort of being told by the powers that be, and the stories that the people in power want to sort of pass along to the next generation, i.e. formal education. And so it is really interesting, and even how we've come to know those things, you know, all those type of things. So again, part of it is that whole, how do you start to speak back to it? And I think that that's a nice thing about being vegan, and it's not about a diet. When people say to me you're vegan, it's like it's about what do you eat. It's actually not about a diet.
That's
it's
right.
about a philosophy of really saying, what does it actually mean for me to reflect on my life? And again, I don't mind what choices people make. You know, I've got a lot of my close friends aren't vegans, they're not vegetarians, they're meat eaters, and that's okay, because again, for me, it's for me, what it is just me reflecting on my life and reflecting on all the things that I've been told and saying, you know what, the only thing I can actually change is me.
Exactly.
And so what can I do that will, and of course I'm a hypocrite, of course we all are, right? It's hard to live in this world, and we do the best that we can. And again, what does compassion look like? You know, I make choices every day that I hope align with my internal beliefs, my vegan beliefs, my beliefs about what I want the world to be, and my beliefs about the other more than human world that I share the planet with. Do I get it right every day? I can't. I mean, I drove here to this interview. Yes, I drove my Prius. But the thing is, I still drive. I mean, we're all hypocrites
in that respect.
But the thing is that we're doing our best, and that's part of being gentle. And if we can all, if everybody can all just live by their ethics, to have and continually research and make sense of this world, and keep asking deeper questions, and vote. Because again, what you're saying is absolutely correct. You know, I say to my students, even if everybody recycled, even if everybody didn't drive their cars, or that plays a role in it. But again, that's nothing compared to what industry is doing. Right? We teach kids that recycle. We teach kids, you know, go out and do this, that, and all these individual things. It's not actually the individual things. They all play a role, but they're nothing compared to what industry is doing. And the only way we can really change that is through political will.
And also, when you say industry, the greatest disruptor of what's happening to the planet has been the animal agriculture industry, because of the incredible land clearing that's been involved, the methane and other pollutants that have gone into the atmosphere or gone into the groundwater or wherever. Just the destruction of that industry that's unsustainable. You know, this is why you know, the only person that we can change is ourselves, and we have a very powerful ability there to say, okay, I'm not going to support this industry anymore. You know, I can make a change, and I can be the example for other people to maybe question why I've done that, and they can learn from it as well, and they can, you know, make the change as well.
That's right. And I guess it's that whole idea of coming back to compassion, right? Full circle around again. If we can show compassion to ourselves, to the people around us, to in our workplaces, to the environment, and even to the big nasty business, right, the corporate. If we can actually live what compassion is, which for me is what the vegan lifestyle is. Again, I say to people when they say, you know, vegan, and they sort of get up in your face about it, and that resistance to change, which is fine, and I understand it, but I say, what's the worst thing I'm doing? I'm saying that we should be more compassionate. Wow, right. I agree. Tell me now. You know, it's like, really, that's the worst thing I'm saying. Then, you know,
there's a few comments there that have come through that I've got to get to because we're starting to run down on time. So Marina says, recently there have been some very interesting documentaries on TV. The first one was on the 6th of August called High Stakes. Second on the 10th of August, Vital Signs, Future of Food. And the third was on the 11th of August, Climate Change, The Facts. All very interesting to do with the future of food and climate change. All a must to watch if you can. That's great, Marina. Thank you. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you. And Marina doesn't like perfect fruit and veggies either. No, actually, I find the most compassionate people think that way too. They prefer the blemished ones because anyway. John says 95% of what people do is based on a social convention rather than an ethical convention. Yes.
Or even just we don't know how to think for ourselves.
That's right.
Deconstruct.
That's right. We don't know how to think for ourselves.
Because we haven't been taught it in schools.
Do you find that we haven't
been taught it in schools?
That's true. And also we are so afraid on the most basic level of being not accepted by alienated because we want to feel loved. So it comes back to that most basic need. We've got to be liked. We've got to be loved.
And again, that's being socially constructed. What is a good girl? A good girl is someone who does the right thing, who's liked. What's the best thing you can be in our society? You can be liked. You know, you're a team player. You're liked. again,
Yeah.
it all comes back to what we've been taught.
True.
Social construction.
Marina says we have a lot to learn from our Indigenous people. I realise we're getting the comments from things we talked about 10 minutes ago. Troy says it's great to see that some scientists are exploring areas of thought which can help life. And it is great, Troy, because I personally have not had much faith in science for the longest time. So, because I did physics and chemistry and all that in high school. So it is good to see this change. It can help life, the planet, and ultimately us too, with compassion and connectedness. Yeah, well said, Troy. Absolutely. John says, I don't know where industry ends and government begins. Well said. Yeah. I think I should share that one on Facebook. That's really good. Kathleen says it goes far beyond that, Harry. A massive manipulated setup. Well, it is. All about money, of course. We'll send you a couple of videos to watch. You will understand the depth of how big this is and how far back this has gone. It is massive. Oh, yes. I have. I am familiar with some of the history that you're talking about there. And it relates. And I mean, the deeper you go into it, the more it gets, into the secret societies and all that. And you're really just like, oh my God, I've gone down a rabbit hole here. It's like, how much of this can my brain handle? And social engineering, yeah, John mentions there. So there was so much more we could have talked about tonight. You are a fantastic, you should be lecturing. You're a fantastic communicator. One of the most amazing communicators I've had the pleasure of talking with. I wanted to, I have so much more I want to ask you, but I just want to go a little bit over time. How are we going to, what's your advice on the best thing to do now in 2019 with the UN's IPCC reports saying, we've got now, 11 years before we've got to have made major changes, or we're totally screwed. What advice could you give?
I think, ultimately for me, my students ask me this question a lot, and it's like, live by your own beliefs, ask questions. It's it's a journey, your own journey. And if you can lead by an example around compassion, around critical thinking, around asking questions, about doing the hard work and making some choices. Again, it's about, we live in a very privileged lifestyle. It's not about giving it up, but it's about rethinking it. And it's about stepping back and saying, what do I need? Okay, yes, I might like the taste of meat, which I can't even say that anymore. It's been too long. But, it's to say that, let's actually have a look at it. Instead of instant gratification, let's have a look at the bigger picture. Let's try and re-educate ourselves. Let's try and think differently. And sometimes it's very challenging. Let's sort of really stop and say, okay, I'm feeling resistance here. I'm feeling a bit of anger. I'm feeling a bit scared here. To actually understand that, recognize it, and go down that path anyway.
It's good advice to get away from the instant gratification and look at the big picture, because we're being forced to do that now.
Yeah, and everything in our society, is instant gratification. We've got a generation that's looking at that.
We've got a generation of people that are unable to focus. They really have very little self-control, very little control of their mind at all, and it's actually not a good trait to have. It just does not help you in your life at all, to not be able to self-control, but that's a whole different thing.
But I think so. Ultimately, it's an individual journey, and I think that it's a ripple effect, and will infect. We'll keep on doing that peaceful journey, that compassionate journey, and it influences other people. It's not about preaching, but it's about leading by example. It's about voting. It's about joining social activism, things like that.
It's an individual journey, as long as it's a journey in the right direction.
Yeah,
that's and I know you're making that point.
But coming in community with like-minded people and getting supported.
There's a good question
like this show.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, David says my head must be full of sand. Where is the hard evidence? We didn't actually share any hard evidence. No. We didn't even get to hard evidence.
But there's a lot out there, and again, there is so much hard evidence. It depends on if we're looking at climate change. Absolutely. I mean, I don't have the memory of the 50 million scientifically valid journals. Go to any journal and you'll see a lot of evidence. There's very little evidence that's actually based around that shows anything against it.
Yes, okay. Katie says, I appreciate this conscious conversation. Thank you for sharing your wonderful knowledge and wisdom. Sue says, thank you. Troy says, invite her back. Actually, yes, I would like you to come back so we can maybe discuss all the hard evidence to keep David happy. And John says, come back again. Well, I love it when you get everybody asking you to come back. That's awesome. And Helen says, wonderfully informative and stimulating. Thank you. Namaste. That's Some of the best.
Thank you.
The best comments to go
Seriously,
out on.
I feel very, very humbled. Thank you.
Actually, it's just been absolutely wonderful to have you here and to listen to you talk and pick up on your wisdom and all. That's been fantastic. Thank you very much, Ali.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to have to wind it up now. We've got a little bit over time, but I'm going to have to wind it up. Otherwise, we'll go all night. Yeah, you would make a great lecturer. I think I said that earlier. We're still getting all the thank yous coming in. That's awesome. Now, this episode, of course, will be. You can watch it at any time on social media and add comments at any time after the live stream's finished. It can be done. And the YouTube version, hopefully, I should have up tomorrow night. So you'll be able to rewatch it in even better quality then. And let me have a look at what's coming up in 2 weeks' time. Oh yeah, we have Pip Coogan from My Green Collective. I believe we're actually, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this or not, but we're trying to organise to actually do a cooking demonstration in here. I don't know if we'll be able to really pull this one off or not. Well, you'll have to tune in and see in 2 weeks' time for episode 17 on Tuesday, September the 3rd. So thank you everyone that's watched and commented. It's been really, really wonderful to see the interest there. Thanks again, Ali, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks' time. Until then, live vegan and save lives, and have a great night. Good night, everyone.